finalement, j'ai appris que Pascal Mallet, vous êtes là, renommé correspondant de l'agence France Presse, va quitter Bruxelles. Monsieur Mallet, nous avons apprécié votre grand intérêt pour l'OTAN et votre sens critique. Vous allez nous manquer. And now I'm ready to take your questions.
N'oubliez pas que les micros sont près de votre siège. On va prendre des questions en français and in English, mais on pourrait peut-être commencer par Pascal. S'il trouve son micro, bien sûr.
Merci, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général. I will remember all my life when I met you the first time for an interview, you told me at the end, you are like a Dane. It was a compliment, of course. So, ma question... Est-ce que vous croyez que l'offensive actuelle des rebelles qui viennent de l'Ouest en direction de Tripoli a des chances de succès? Et est-ce que l'OTAN va les assister, les soutenir concrètement? J'ai une deuxième question. Vous allez recevoir mercredi prochain des délégués du Conseil national de transition. Pouvez-vous confirmer cela déjà? Ainsi que le fait que vous les recevrez avec le NAC, avec le Conseil de l'Atlantique Nord, ou seulement vous-même, séparément?
Merci beaucoup. En ce qui concerne l'avancée des forces de l'opposition, ce n'est pas à nous de le dire, mais c'est clair que Gaddafi perd du terrain chaque jour. Sa machine de guerre est dégradée. Ses généraux et ses ministres le lâchent. Il a perdu le soutien de la communauté internationale. Brièvement, c'est la fin de la partie. En ce qui concerne le contact avec l'opposition, je peux confirmer que le Conseil de l'OTAN aura une réunion informelle avec M. Dibril et des autres représentants du TNC. Cette réunion aura lieu le 13 juillet. Et en plus, j'ai une rencontre bilatérale avec M. Dibril. En fait, j'ai rencontré M. Dibril avant, au cadre des réunions du groupe international du contact.
Reuters.
Secretary General David Brunstrom from Reuters. Following on from your trip to Russia, did you hear anything in Russia or since you've returned to give credence to reports we've seen in the Russian media quoting high-level sources, a high-level source saying that Gaddafi has been sounding out the possibility of stepping down on certain conditions, including a political role for his son. And do you see any possibility of any such accommodation?
Well, I have no confirmed information that Colonel Gaddafi has sounded out the possibility to step down, but it's quite clear that the end state must be that he leaves power. That has been clearly stated by the international community and by the opposition in Libya. I see that as the only possible way forward.
Romanian radio.
Secretary General, Luminița Apostol Radio Romania. There were some reports after the NATO-Russia Council in Sochi about the fact that during the meeting, the Russian President Medvedev strongly criticized the Romanian President for some remarks related to events from World War II. These remarks have been seen as a statement against Russia. Could you confirm that, or could you give us some more details?
President Medvedev addressed this issue in a confidential diplomatic framework and in terms appropriate to that framework. The Romanian ambassador to NATO responded in the same framework and in the same terms. Obviously, I will not comment on bilateral issues or misunderstandings. We all agree that it is important to preserve the Lisbon spirit of open dialogue and cooperation between NATO and Russia, and to avoid any actions that could affect that spirit.
Associated Press.
Slabo Lekic from the Associated Press. The bombing campaign over Libya is proceeding much longer than originally expected, and it's now very likely that it'll go until the end of the month at least. We're coming up against Ramadan, which starts on August 1st. Will NATO continue bombing Libya during the month of Ramadan?
As you all know, NATO has been mandated by the United Nations Security Council to protect civilians against any attack, and we have been mandated to take all necessary measures to protect the civilian population against such attack. We could hope that the Gaddafi regime will stop attacking and bombing its own people during the Ramadan.
FT Deutschland. It's next to your seat.
Sorry, microphone problems. Two questions. First on Gaddafi's son, Saif al-Islam. Could you imagine him to be the leader of the new Libya instead of his father? Would that be okay for you, for NATO? And the second question is, France recently delivered weapons to the rebels. What sense does a NATO embargo, arms embargo, make if one of the member countries delivers weapons to one of the sides in this Libyan civil war? Thanks.
As regards a possible successor to Colonel Gaddafi, if I understand you correctly, you mentioned one of his sons who is included in the ICI arrest warrant. So I think the International Criminal Court has already given you the answer. According to the court, his place should be in The Hague and not in Tripoli. So I think that's a clear answer to your question. As regards the delivery of weapons. First of all, let me stress that this delivery of weapons has not taken place within a NATO framework, and it's not part of the NATO operation. I understand that this delivery of a weapon from France has taken place with the aim to protect civilians, with the aim to make civilians capable to defend themselves against attacks. The NATO operation aims at implementing the UN Security Council Resolution 1973, according to which we are enforcing a no-fly zone, an arms embargo, and we are protecting civilians. So far, we have implemented that resolution successfully.
Croatian media?
I'm from Croatian daily Večernji List. I'd go back to the missile defense cooperation with Russia. I'm just wondering, do you maybe envisage something more than just mere exchange of information, like in a hypothetical situation that it becomes obvious that Iran might start firing its missiles, or North Korea, that there will be some sort of command cooperation or even ad hoc joint command between NATO and Russia?
We are still working on the architecture and the framework for missile defense cooperation. But one of the elements in a practical missile defense cooperation could be to establish a center or a couple of joint centers that could serve as a framework for exchange of data. And that would actually make the whole system much more effective if we could cooperate on exchanging data. We could also envisage the elaboration of joint threat assessments. We could envisage preparation of joint exercises, just to mention some elements in practical cooperation on missile defense.
James?
Yes, Brooks Singer, Jane's Defense. Two follow-up questions precisely on this subject, missile defense. Would you consider that political talks are ahead or behind the technical arrangements between Russia and NATO on missile defense? And is the goal to have a deal announced at this summit you mentioned? And second, beyond the mere data sharing, this comes to your joint centers, is the idea that I'm wondering whether there will be any physical sharing of infrastructure, budgets, and personnel, or whether everything will be kept strictly separate on each side. Thank you.
Yeah, if we can agree to establish joint centers, they would also be jointly staffed. That's actually the essence of this. And I think such practical cooperation would be the very best reassurance for both sides, actually. Reassurance that neither of the systems are directed against the other part in that cooperation. I think the first part of your question relates to technical discussions. Yes, we have political deliberations within the framework of the NATO-Russia Council, but we have also more technical discussions at expert level. And I think the time horizon could realistically be next spring when we are going to have a NATO summit in Chicago, and we still keep the option open to also have a NATO-Russia summit if we can ensure concrete results from such a summit.
Defense news.
Yeah, same as along similar lines on missile defense. Could you give your assessment of how likely you think you are to bring Russia on board? What more can you offer them to reassure them? And are there signs that they would accept two different missile defense systems?
Well, actually, we are still in a very early phase of the preparation of such practical cooperation. So I think it's premature to present any final judgment. But I am optimistic, though we have still a lot of work to do, in particular when it comes to the question about reassurance. But what I reminded our Russian hosts during our visit to Russia Monday, Tuesday, what I reminded them was the fact that already in 1997, when Russia and NATO adopted the so-called Founding Act, already at that time we agreed that we will not use force against each other. At that time, this political promise was signed by 16 NATO allies, because NATO had at that time 16 member states. Since then, NATO has been enlarged, and today NATO counts 28 allies. I feel sure that all 28 allies would be pleased to sign that statement, namely that NATO and Russia are not going to use force against each other. And that, of course, also includes missile defense. So we have already agreed such a mutual obligation, and we could easily reiterate that political obligation.
Wall Street Journal.
Stephen Fiddler from the Wall Street Journal. Just seeking a little more clarity on what you said about the Gaddafi family earlier. There are members of the Gaddafi family who haven't been indicted by the ICC. Would any of them be regarded as acceptable? I have a second question about. It's been a few weeks since the Secretary Gates gave a critique of the European allies' contribution in Libya and of their general contribution to European military security. Have you seen any evidence since then of European governments stepping more up to the plate? And finally, I apologize if you made a reference to this in your introductory remarks, but I'd be interested in any assessment you have of how the rebels, the opposition to Gaddafi, is doing militarily in Libya, and whether you see any evidence of advances, for example, in the west of the country. Thank you.
First, as regards the future political leadership of Libya, I would like to stress that it is for the Libyan people to shape the future of Libya. And I think we need a political process. There is obviously no military solution solely to the conflict in Libya. We need a political process leading to a credible democracy, And I think it is for the Libyan people to shape that future, possibly in cooperation with the international community. So I think the question you raised should be dealt with in a framework where the Libyan people and the international community, the international contact group, discuss the way forward as to how we can ensure the fulfillment of the UN Security Council resolution that talks about the accommodation of the legitimate aspirations of the Libyan people. As far as NATO is concerned, we are focused on the implementation of the UN Security Council resolution aiming at protecting civilians against attacks, enforcing the no-fly zone and the arms embargo. In parallel, there is a political track, and I think it should be dealt with within the framework of the international contact group first and foremost. As regards the opposition forces, we have seen progress. They have advanced in recent weeks. But of course, we don't know for sure how far they can advance. Our task is to implement the UN Security Council resolution, but what we do know is that the Gaddafi war machine has been considerably degraded. His capability to attack civilians has been considerably decreased, and we consider that a success of our operation. As regards Secretary Gates' farewell remarks, which he delivered just before he left office, I think they should be seen in a more long-term context. What he actually pointed out was the fact that we have seen an increasing gap between the United States and Europe during recent years. I share his concerns. If that development continues, it will be increasingly difficult for Europe to take part in international crisis management in the future because of lack of critical capabilities such as strategic airlift, critical intelligence and reconnaissance assets, etc. So I think it was appropriate that Secretary Gates pointed to that risk. But having said that, I think the good news is that the Libya operation is an example of Europe in cooperation with Canada and partners in the region taking the lead. We have been used to American lead of all NATO operations. But the Libya operation is actually an example that the majority of aircrafts has been provided by European allies and Canada and partners in the region. And that is a testament to the strength and the solidarity of our alliance.
Europa Press.
Thank you, Secretary General. A quick question, if I may. Is NATO as optimistic as Turkey that we will be able to find a final solution for Libya in August? And my second question, if I may, is France yesterday, concretely the French Minister of Defense, said that France was no longer going to arm the rebels because they didn't consider this necessary anymore. With your statements that you've just made on the recent advances by the rebels, do you share this same vision as France, that it's no longer necessary? Thank you so much.
As delivery of weapons is not part of the NATO operation, I'm not going to comment on that. As far as the timetable is concerned, I'm not going to guess about timetables. What I can tell you is that we will continue our operations until our military objectives have been met, and we have laid out 3 clear military objectives. Firstly, a complete end to all attacks against civilians. Secondly, withdrawal of Gaddafi forces to their bases. And thirdly, immediate and unhindered humanitarian access to people in need. These objectives are not met yet, and we will continue until they are met.
NPR.
Terry Schultz with NPR and Global Post. Mr. Secretary, you just brought up another question for me. Can you give us an update on how many partners are now taking part in airstrikes in the Libyan operation? And back to the French issue again. Isn't it actually a problem and not an explanation that NATO had no role in France's decision to make these arms drops, and as I understand it, you were informed after it happened? Shouldn't that be something that should be brought up with NATO? And even if France doesn't do it again, what's to stop another partner from doing that? And is that a problem as you see it inside the alliance, as far as solidarity, understanding what other partners are doing? Thanks.
Firstly, on airstrikes, we never go into such operational details. It's a good try, but no, I'm not tempted to answer that question. To make it very short, I don't consider the so-called arms drop a problem. But again, I would like to stress that it's not part of the NATO operation, and that's what I can say about it. We are focused on the implementation of the UN Security Council resolution.
2 last quick questions. ANSA, Italian News Agency.
Yes, hi, Marisa Stolani from ANSA Italian News Agency. Quick question. You said the Libya operation is an example of the solidarity between the allies, but even this morning, Italy said that has intention to cut the resource and the fund for the defense mission abroad, and so that could have an impact also on Libya. Other countries are considering to step out, Norwegian, Belgium also. So you are not concerned about the fact that you could not have the necessary capability in order to stay on this mission till the end? Thanks.
No, on the contrary, I'm confident that we will have the necessary assets at our disposal. We have the necessary resources, we have the necessary assets. Allies and partners have committed themselves to provide the necessary assets to see this through to a successful end. And as you know, we recently decided to prolong our operation for another 3 months. And in that same context, allies and partners committed themselves to provide the necessary assets to continue the operation.
Une toute dernière question, Radio France Internationale.
Oui, secrétaire général, Pierre Benazé, Radio France. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous donner plus de détails et de précisions sur votre rencontre avec les délégués de Benghazi la semaine prochaine? Est-ce que vous comptez évoquer le soutien que l'OTAN apporte ou peut apporter à la rébellion? Est-ce que vous comptez aussi les sonder sur leurs intentions de relations de négociation avec le régime et Tripoli?
Le but de cette réunion est d'échanger des points de vue et je pense que M. Dibril va présenter la feuille de route pour la transition envers la démocratie en Libye. Comme vous le savez, le TNC a élaboré une telle feuille de route et c'est important pour le Conseil de l'OTAN de discuter ce sujet avec M. Dibril. Mais le but primordial, c'est d'échanger des points de vue.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.